I can't let go of this feeling. It's tearing me apart inside.
Daniel Harris slouched into his old recliner, the weight of the day pressing against his shoulders. Outside, the sky was dim, turning quickly into night. Bills were scattered on the table, his children's laughter distant, his heart heavy from the constant grind of work, deadlines, and responsibilities. He scrolled through his phone without paying much attention, barely noticing the endless feed of videos and posts. Then a thumbnail appeared. Bright, intriguing, with bold letters. Simon froze in shock. The Filipino Elvis just changed AGT forever flushed-face microphone. Something about it made him pause. There was a boy in the image, nervous, humble, almost fragile, yet his eyes glimmered with a quiet, undeniable strength. Daniel tapped the video, almost unconsciously, and leaned back, letting the screen take over his attention. The first seconds were simple, a dimly lit stage, a boy standing alone. But as the music began, Daniel felt a shiver run through him. The voice was small at first, tentative, but it carried something deeper than technique. It carried heart, pain, love, and a story hidden behind every note. Daniel's eyes softened. His shoulders relaxed. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope, raw and tender, creeping into the corners of his worn-out heart. He watched the boy's hands tremble slightly as he clutched the microphone. He noticed the faint determination in the way the boy held his posture, the small inhale before he began singing. There was no performance, no pretension, no exaggeration, only a young soul sharing his truth with the world. In that moment, Daniel felt a connection stretching across oceans, between him and a boy he had never met. The screen became a window into a life so different from his own, yet somehow mirrored his own struggles, his own dreams quietly buried beneath the monotony of daily life. By the time the first note swelled into the room, Daniel's eyes were wet. He leaned forward, utterly absorbed, unable to look away. Something extraordinary was happening. Not just a song, but a story of courage, resilience, and the quiet power of hope. And he knew, deep inside, that this video would change more than just the boy on stage. It was about to change him too. Far across the ocean, in a small coastal village in the Philippines, a boy named Elias Cruz grew up surrounded by the constant rhythm of the sea. Wooden homes clung to stilts above the sand, fishing boats rocked gently in the harbor, and the wind carried stories of lives lived hard and fast. Life was simple, yet unforgiving. Poverty pressed on every household, and every day required work, patience, and hope. Elias's father had left years before, leaving behind a photograph, a few belongings, and a stack of old Elvis Presley cassettes. They were scratched, worn, almost forgotten, but to Elias, they were treasures. Each night, he would place a cassette in a battered tape player, close his eyes, and let the music fill the small room. The melodies became his companion, his mentor, and his escape from the harshness of reality. His mother, Maria Cruz, worked tirelessly, washing clothes for neighbors, cleaning small shops, and preparing meager meals. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her body, but her eyes always found Elias, listening to him hum, her heart quietly proud. She had no words for the fire she saw in her son, but she knew, his voice carried more than notes, it carried hope, resilience, and the courage to dream. Elias practiced every day. He sang along narrow streets and near crowded markets, letting his voice float over waves of noise. Passers-by often paused, enchanted by the raw emotion, by the sincerity in his tone. They began calling him, the Filipino Elvis, not because he imitated the king of rock, but because he carried the same burning soul, a fire born from struggle, love, and longing. At night, after chores and practice, Elias would sit by the sea, listening to the wind and the crashing waves. He imagined a world far beyond his small village, a stage so big he could hardly picture it, filled with people whose faces he had never seen. And in those moments, he vowed silently, one day, his voice would travel across oceans. One day, it would make the world stop and listen. Though he was still just a boy, with trembling hands and a hopeful heart, Elias had already begun to understand the power of a song, not for fame, not for applause, but for the ability to touch hearts, heal wounds, and remind people that even in the darkest places, hope can shine. One morning, as Elias hummed over the waves of the harbor, a small envelope arrived at his tiny home. It was thin, simple, yet it carried words that felt almost impossible. A talent scout from the United States had seen videos of his performances online and wanted him to audition for America's Got Talent. Elias stared at the paper, trembling. He could hardly believe it. His small voice, born in a village barely known on any map, had reached halfway across the world. But reality quickly returned with a harsh weight. Airplane tickets were expensive, visas seemed impossible, and the thought of leaving his mother, his home, and the village that raised him pressed heavily on his chest. Dreams are beautiful, but sometimes, they feel too far away to touch. Elias sank onto the floor, staring at the envelope as the waves crashed in the distance, reminding him of all the storms he had weathered already. Yet, Elias was not alone. His mother, Maria, though exhausted and worried, quietly held his hand. She had seen the fire in her son's heart since he was a boy humming along to worn-out Elvis tapes. She understood that this was more than a performance, it was the culmination of every sleepless night, every coin saved, every tiny note sung with hope. Word spread through the village like sunlight over the water. Neighbors whispered, shared ideas, and slowly, quietly, they came together. Fishermen offered portions of their meager savings. Shopkeepers tucked coins into small envelopes. Children emptied their piggy banks. Everyone gave what they could. Alone, no one could have sent Elias across the ocean, but together, the village built a bridge of hope, brick by brick, coin by coin. Finally, with a single suitcase, a borrowed jacket, and his father's faded scarf in his pocket, Elias prepared to leave. He stood at the edge of the dock, looking back at the small homes and familiar streets that had shaped him. The sea stretched before him, wide and uncertain, yet it no longer seemed frightening. He carried with him more than clothes and belongings. He carried the love, trust, and faith of an entire community, each heartbeat echoing in his chest as he stepped toward the plane that would take him to a stage bigger than he had ever imagined. For the first time, Elias felt the full weight of what he was about to do. And yet, beneath the nervousness, a quiet certainty settled in his soul, he was ready. The lights of the AGT stage hit Elias like a wave. Bright, blinding, overwhelming, every shadow disappeared, leaving him standing alone in a sea of pure white light. The audience was massive, stretching far beyond what his eyes could see. Cameras swiveled, microphones hovered, and the judges' table glimmered like a distant island in the vast hall. Elias's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. His father's faded scarf lay hidden in his pocket, a small talisman against fear. He inhaled slowly, trying to calm the storm inside. Every beat of his heart echoed loudly in his chest. One wrong note, one faltering moment, and it could all collapse. Yet he knew, deep down, that this was more than a performance, it was his story, his voice, and the hopes of an entire village traveling across oceans. He began to sing. At first, his voice was fragile, like a small candle flickering against the wind. The notes wavered, carrying the raw weight of every lonely night, every practice session in a dimly lit room, every whispered prayer to a father who was gone. Slowly, the voice strengthened, expanding into the hall, weaving through the shadows, lifting hearts, and quieting every movement around him. The audience froze. People stopped breathing. Phones hovered mid-air, cameras paused, even the crew stopped their hurried work. And then Simon Cowell, sharp, cynical, and rarely surprised, froze entirely. His pen hovered above the judge's pad. His lips parted slightly. He leaned forward, almost unable to process the voice that carried something more than skill, it carried truth, pain, resilience, and undeniable emotion. Elias's voice climbed, soared, and trembled with every note. The song was not just music, it was a bridge connecting a tiny village in the Philippines to the hearts of everyone watching. The world felt quiet, suspended, as if time itself had stopped to listen. When the final note lingered in the air, the silence lasted for a breath too long, heavy with awe and disbelief. Then the hall erupted. Standing ovations shook the room. Tears rolled down faces. Cheers exploded in waves. Simon remained still for a moment, stunned by what he had just witnessed, a boy who had turned fear into courage, vulnerability into power, and a simple addition into a historic moment. Elias stepped back, chest heaving, eyes shining. He had not just performed, he had touched hearts, reminded the world of hope, and made everyone present feel something they hadn't felt in years. When Elias left the AGT stage that night, he felt as if the world around him had shifted. The backstage hallway, once dark and intimidating, now felt lighter, as though every shadow had been replaced with quiet admiration. Crew members paused to watch him pass. Some smiled with tear-filled eyes. Others simply nodded, unable to express the emotion he had awakened in them. Elias walked slowly, still breathing heavily, unsure if the moment had truly happened or if it was a dream clinging to his skin. Across the world, the video of his performance began spreading like wildfire. Within minutes, phones buzzed, notifications lit up screens, and comments flooded in. People shared the clip with captions filled with disbelief, inspiration, and gratitude. Viewers wrote about how Elias's voice reminded them of lost loved ones, broken dreams they once chased, or a hope they had forgotten existed somewhere deep within them. In a quiet apartment in New York, a nurse returning from a long night shift wiped tears from her eyes as she watched Elias sing. In a small town in Texas, an elderly couple held hands, whispering memories of the first concerts they ever attended. In classrooms, offices, and cafes, people paused their routines to watch the young man whose voice felt like it carried the stories of millions. Meanwhile, back in his hotel room, Elias sat alone on the edge of his bed, unsure of what to feel. The applause still echoed in his chest, but a soft disbelief lingered. Could a boy from a tiny coastal village really move the world this way? The phone in his hand buzzed endlessly, messages from strangers, journalists, producers, old friends, and neighbors from home who had stayed awake all night just to watch him live. Far across the ocean, in his small village, people gathered outside Maria's home. The video played on every screen they could find. Children pointed excitedly. Elders wiped tears quietly. Maria pressed her hand to her mouth as she watched her son's final note echo through the hall. In that moment, she didn't see a contestant on a global stage, she saw her little boy singing barefoot in their living room, holding a wooden spoon like a microphone. The world celebrated Elias, but the village understood him. They had watched his journey from the beginning, through every hardship, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. And now, as his voice traveled across continents, they felt their own stories travel with him. Somewhere deep inside, Elias realized something important: he hadn't just sung a song. He had opened a door, one that began in a humble village and now stretched across the world, touching hearts he had never met. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt truly, deeply seen.